I'm going to tell you a story. This is the story of my Santas and Christmas. Back a few years back, when Bob, my husband, and I both retired, we retired from the business world. We had worked with people. We loved to be with people. And we needed something to do. So we started attending auction sales and buying old stuff. It might be household, anything collectible, especially any old Christmas we bought. And we started doing antique shows. We bought a motorhome, a big enclosed trailer. We did it all. We had fun. We went to Burlington, Kentucky once a month and took all of this old stuff. And along the way, we found anything that we took Christmas, somebody was waiting on it. So I thought, So I started making a few Christmas things. Nothing elaborate, and I didn't pretend they were old. I signed everything, but they bought it. And it grew from there. There's where I started. I started making whimsies, for the want of a better word. Matter of fact, I brought some. I should have it out already, but I don't. Just little trinkets. This one doesn't have a hanger on it. Most of them do. But anyway, we put a hemp hanger on them where they could hang it on the Christmas tree. And I sold these little things for $1 a piece. Good grief, they bought every one of them. Dealers would buy 15, 20 at a time. But they, in turn, paid the expense of our shows and booth rent. It kind of grew from there. I would notice that the paper mache Santas, the old ones that we got at carnivals and dime stores, whatever, and some of them would be broken, have the nose torn off of. People would buy them anyway. They were old and they were Christmas. So I thought, I need to do this. I didn't know how. I didn't know anybody that knew how. I started with nothing, absolutely nothing. But I started paper mache. That was a mess. Believe me, there's all kinds of paper mache that you try to mix. But I found a school catalog for the art teachers, and Blake. It was Blake. And I found a mache that really was just powdered newspapers, but it was ground up and it had glue in it. And you mix it with water. It's wonderful clay. And you know what? I use it to this day. These are all made out of this clay. And so I started making things. Where I learned to sculpt, I must have been 8 or 10 years old. I had a cousin, Bernard, and he and I would go to our grandparents' farm in the summertime. Loved to go to the farm, do things. This was back during Depression. There were no toys at the farm, so what we had to play with, we made. We made a playhouse in one of Granddad's old sheds up in the loft. We used his apple crates for furniture, but we didn't have anything to put on our tables. We used our grandmother's canning jar lids for dishes, but we needed apples and grapes and oranges, so we went out and dug us up some dirt off of the farm, mixed it with water, and of course, this was in Jackson County, not too far from the Medora Brick Company. It had a lot of clay in it. I tell you, we laid those things out in the sun and they got as hard as a rock. But these were our toys. This is where I started sculpting. I must have been 8, maybe 10 years old. But anyway, I knew that you could make things. I had no one to consult with. It was just learn by yourself. So I did. And then after I got that far, I needed to I should have had this up here, but I got a table full. I decided that why make each one separate why not make something that I can mold and make lots of them? So I did. This was the original one that I'm crafted and made, painted. I signed it on the bottom. Original 2010. But in order to make a mold off of him, he first had to be coated with rubber. And one coating of rubber wouldn't do it. There again, I didn't know how many, so I just kept adding to it, and it took a total of 7 coats of liquid rubber, and each coat had to dry. It took a day for it to dry. And then after I got it finished, he was still on this. Then I need a heavy mold because this stretches. You start pouring plaster in it, and it would stretch all out of shape. So I needed a heavy mold to fit that in, to hold it all together. I would put it like this. It says front on it, Betty, can't you read? Then I rubber band it together and found, I think, a coffee jar or something to put in. Then I could pull my plaster in here, and it dried fast. I learned you start stirring it, and when it starts getting creamy, you better move it fast because it's going to set up on you. But it starts drying within an hour's time. It is dry, but I would leave it 2 hours at least, or 3 hours. Then I could take it out of the mold, and it would sit. It would be just plaster. This is another case of the same thing. And I could make probably 8 or 10 a day this way. So see, this is where I got. As a matter of fact, those little Santas in there are made off of this mold. Those little Santas that I've got with the Crocs in there. Okay, these are another case. I made dogs. I made a lot of dogs. Here's one of them here. But all my dogs I called Barney. We had a dog Barney years ago at home, so all my dogs are Barney. From there, I went to what I called soft Santas. We evolved. I don't care what you're doing. Your mind is way out here waiting on you. So I started making soft Santas. And for the armature or the bones, most of them just have a heavy wire that I had to wrap with tape and then padded it. It had to all be padded and fastened. Then I would lay them on a table and measure them out and make a coat or whatever, hat for them. And the clothes mostly are made by hand because that fuzzy stuff doesn't work on a sewing machine anyway. But this was a pair of old blue jeans, I think. And I couldn't sew it by hand. It was too hard. That's kind of pretty much it. But I started making then these soft Santas doing things. I want my Santas to all be happy and doing things. Either that or holding something. And I've had them with sheep. I had a sheep in there. I think it sold, somebody said. And donkeys. I've got a donkey that I made that I'm going to put out. If I can find him. Didn't have room for all this on the table. But this Santa is holding this donkey. And I called all the donkeys Henry. But he's holding him. You can put him any way you want him. And donkeys need apples. The story in this was that Santa needed the apples to catch the donkey. So, but I used some of my sculpt. This is sculpt, not paper mache, but I sculpted in paper mache. But I mean, it wasn't reproduce. This is an original. And that Santa is original.
Is a donkey supposed to be a toy or?
No, he's just Santa with Santa. Santa's carrying him with a basket of apples. He claimed he needed the apples to catch the donkey. So that's the story. I try to have a story. You can look at them. The story in this one was Santa was tired. He was sitting down for a rest and a smoke. My Santa smoked back then because I claim my things were made a few years back before they started using spray on the tobacco. Consequently, the tobacco smelled good. It was good. So Santa had sat down for a smoke and rest, and Barney saw Santa sitting there. He came and jumped up on the seat beside him. That's the story of this. This one, Santa was catching a ride on this guy. But we had cattle on the farm for many, many years until Bob wasn't able to take care of them anymore. They strictly went to just crop farming. Anyway, those were the cattle we had. So I kind of took him off of one of the pictures of the cattle that we had on the farm. That's kind of my story. The ultimate theme of my story is happiness. I choose to be happy. I will be 100. And I want my Santas to put a smile on everyone's face that sees them. And I think they do. I get notes from people. Yes, Betty, he did make me smile. That's what it's all about. I thank you. That's my story.
Great. I want to say, I love how when you post on Facebook, how you always say, when you start, you don't know what it's going to end up being, and that your Santas talk to you and tell you what they're going to be.
I leave them sitting out while I'm working on them, and as I go by, I'll look at them, and they'll tell me, that needs to be changed. That's not right.
I also have one on a large camel that you did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got everything that I can think of.
Yeah.
I thank you.
Do you want to ask, are they going to ask you questions? You did a great job.
Anybody have a question
Yeah.
or anything else to say?
I think I've covered it, but maybe not.
Does the cow have a name?
Oh, yeah, she's Sugar.
Sugar. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a friend that had a cow, and she'd made a pet out of it. I don't know, just kind of stuck. So I named my cows.
You're going to be 100.
Uh-huh.
You don't mean like in 10 years. Like when will you turn 100, Betty?
December the 15th.
Oh, my God. Oh,
It's been a good ride, I tell you it has. I was born back in Depression days. Our families didn't have anything, but we were all in the same boat, so it was all right. But we were happy. I remember the first Christmas that I remember. Of course, we can only remember back so far. But I would have been 5 years old because my brother was born that year. But anyway, I remember my dad. I didn't know at the time, but I figured it out later when I got a little older. Somebody knocked at the door with a ho, 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 and it came in carrying a big sack of stuff. And it was a Merry Christmas. And he was pretending to be Santa Claus. And he said, my reindeer run in the ditch up here. And I kind of messed up my suit. So he just had on regular old clothes. But I remember what he had, what I got for Christmas that year. I had one doll. It was a little doll. It had a tin head. I remember that because we had a fire later and it got burned. But anyway, that Christmas, my mother had clothes for my doll. That was my Christmas. That was my Christmas. But it was special. It was special. But, any other questions? Or?
Not really a question, but something you were telling me beforehand that I would love everyone to hear. Tell them what you had to say about hobbies and what this does for you.
I think everybody needs something. My grandmother Holmes our grandmother made the remark one time, and it stuck to me. Everybody needs something, some syrup to take all the vinegar down. And we need something that's fun to do. It can be a hobby, whatever, that you can look forward to. And when you're doing your chores, when I get done, I'll get to work on this. I think it's a good thing. Okay.
Thank you.
I'll sit down. Let Betty talk. Now you're. Oh, I wanted to tell you something else. I looked at Betty and I remembered.
That's why the other Betty did stand up.
See, I made Christmas trees too. I liked them to look old and funky, kind of, different. But one year, Betty had a class. And Terry and I went to the class, and we learned to make feather trees. I don't have any feathers, but I have a lot of this old Christmas tree stuff. So I made my Christmas trees out of Betty's pattern. She showed us how to wind the tape around. Uh-huh. So Betty, I think
I remember that class too.
but it was fun. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, that's probably my most memorable class.
All those feathers. Yeah, I remember the feathers.
I got this in my head that I thought I should. Well, we had a lot of classes, and I'm really interested in feather trees, and I'm like, well, so I practiced one. I'm like, well, it's okay. But I hadn't dyed them yet. And I just used the white feathers. I had an old feather ticking of covering of feathers, old feather bed. So, and it went really well. I just used the tape and had a stick, or I think something like we had a stick, and I had a whole bunch of women that signed up for that class. It went on and on and on and on, and I don't know if you ever got your. But I ended up helping the last ones to leave. I was like wrapping all this to try to get them done. It was, and you know how many of those classes I taught?
I'm glad I got
I had
in.
a lot of classes, and most of them we would do different times again. But that did it. I decided that this feather business is not going to be right. I mean, actually, we had that class in where the winery is now, if you remember. Yeah.
I don't remember.
Terry, I don't know. Did you come to that one?
Your memory's better than mine.
We enjoyed that class so much, though. I laughed about that over the years.
You know,
Feathers everywhere.
honestly, we should have just sprayed them dark when we got done, because I tried to dye them and it didn't take. I thought feathers, and I bet it's the oil on the feathers.
Yeah.
They just didn't. They weren't dark enough to make me very happy. But we should have just sprayed them when we got done. I would tell you, there's no place I'd rather be this afternoon than to be here with you today. My life in doing crafting, painting, whatever, has been nothing but just pure joy. And when you're saying it's something everybody needs to do, the world would be a lot happier and a lot kinder if we had that in our life. That's one of the most therapeutic of any hobbies that you can have, is to keep your hands creative and your mind active. Because if you just, is this a living example of staying, if you don't want to stay engaged and exercise and stretch and all the things in your life, think of her, because she's my inspiration. Her husband, Bob, his family goes back a long way with me. I went to Lovett Elementary, a little school. And Mr. Creech and Mrs. Creech had a grocery store there in Lovett, and it was not very far. There was Beano Davis had the other one store there by the railroad track, where it used to be. That's how country people say what used to be there. But we couldn't quite get to Beano's on lunchtime, but we could get to Mr. Creech's and get bubble gum or whatever our hearts desire. We would go down to Mr. Creech's and have just a little something for us. And I have such vivid memories. He smoked a cigar, and he was really very nice to the kids. He was very, very gentle and kind, and I just have really lovely memories. And I don't know if I told Bob that. I would think I surely did. But what a good place to grow up in has been Jennings County. Just wonderful people, wonderful memories. And sometimes I see all this on TV and I'm like, why don't these people just get out of town and move out? and enjoy themselves wherever they are. So, you know, my heart is a country woman, and I grew up with my daddy raised cattle for a living, and he would generally have about 150. He also had crops, but we didn't have, my daddy never worked one day of his life off the farm. That's really quite amazing. And so we had Black Angus cattle, and he didn't have a boy. He only had the two girls, and I was the younger of the two. And so I was the one elected to work on the farm. And I would drive the tractors. He got me a little Alice Chalmer. It had a foot feed, which I thought was so cool. And I remember the first time I ever drove that, I was about 10 or 12, right down the hill. My mother was just she was hysterical. She knew I was going to turn that over. And it was actually two wheels in the back and two little ones in the front. And I knew that, you know, you had to keep these things in balance. And she was so worried about me, but it didn't bother me that I was worried, but I didn't do it very much in front of her, I don't think, again. But it worked out. And, you know, I think back to my family where we've lived. No wonder I paint farm scenes. That's my passion, is painting about animals and the old time ways. And living on the farm as we did, you know, my dad, he would custom bale for other people. And he generally would rake hay, but he'd let me do that rarely as I got a little older. He would let me plow, but he didn't really like me to disc very well. I would disc, but I would turn kind of short, and then the disc would kind of climb up on the wheel, and that's pretty dangerous. So, you know, I got the more menial jobs, but I always had to go to the field. And my grandpa, he was such a loving grandpa. That's my grandpa in this one picture. He was kind of a chubby guy, he would roar like a lion, and he had the heart of a cat. He was just so kind and kitten-like almost. And so he always wore his overalls. And the interesting thing about that, his overalls would hang down in the back, and you could see he must not have had underwear on, I don't think. Because I remember you could look in his pockets, and it was like pink. You know how the overalls would sort of unbutton there. And so Grandpa had two big old workhorses, which were Pete and Belle. And but in getting the way the farm is, we live on the southern part of where Grandpa lived, and that's about a mile from where I grew up. My great-grandfather came from Germany, and he bought another farm. They moved over to Tea Creek, and I find that really, to me, kind of interesting. The Germans came from Nordheim, Germany. They came in a group, and it must have been at least 20 families. They left Germany to escape the war that was going on in Germany. And so they settled down near Tea Creek, which is from where my farm is. It's about 5 miles, and we've got another farm there. But they settled there, and my grandpa, it was his father and his brother that were teenagers, and there were 2 girls about that when they came, and about 1844, I think maybe. And so Grandpa, he never spoke English until he was 7 years old. They had this kind of closed community. Well, it's not all that far from, if you cut through through the woods there, from where Karen is. And you know, there was a little church there, and I have that it was a Lutheran church, German Lutheran. And then they had a school right, you know, where the Sharps are. It was a German school there. And there was a little cemetery there, and I think that's where my sister and her husband were buried, and my ancestors. My dad and mother didn't want to be buried there, but we will be, I think, someday. And but Daddy would have all these cattle, so we were about a mile or so from where I am. And how do you get cows in those days? Under 50 cows from one place to another. Well, of course, you drove them. It's like a cattle drive. So we would have somebody on one side of the horse and somebody on the other side of the horse with a horse. And Daddy would walk with the lead cows, and they would just follow that old lead cow right where they went. You know, animals, if you handle them early, you can tame most any kind of an animal, but you have to handle them early. You know, if you have kittens and things and you don't handle them very early, then they're going to be pretty wild. So we would that seems so normal, but I'm like, what do we do if we wanted to drive 150 cows down the road now? I mean, you'd have to get all these permits and police and everything, you know, it would be a whole different situation. So that was kind of my beginning. And then Daddy would tell me, my grandpa, of course, lived where we do, and I love our old barn, and he always had workhorses that lived in the barn, and then they had a lot of cows there. He had a lot of shorthorns instead of the Angus. And they had a lot of pigs, and because pigs were easy to raise, and they provided meat, and they gave them lard, and, you know, they had all the things that come out of the pig. So how did he get them to Madison? Now, we're 15 miles from Madison. How would he get them to Madison? He drove them. They didn't have a truck. They didn't have any kind of anything to haul a lot of pigs. So they would take those pigs, and it was probably, I'd say it's probably 50 or 75. They would drive them to Midway, which most of us around here know where Midway is, about halfway to Madison, where you get Cokes there in my old days when I used to drink them. But you would drive them, and then they had lots, and so you stayed there with your pigs, and the next morning you'd get them up and you drive them to the river. Now, in that room in there, that brick wall, beautiful, that brick wall, I have several pictures that have pigs on them. And the reason I do pigs is I have such beautiful memories about pigs. Madison is sort of like the pig is sort of their symbol that they use for their town, because they had the packing company was there for years. And I just kind of imagine how the pigs could, in 2 days, they could walk 15 miles. But they didn't hardly have those little short legs they had. I don't know how they hardly took it. But when you see me paint pigs, I usually paint that with a reference to Madison, because we love to go to Madison. And so I'm in the gallery in Madison. They have a new gallery in Madison. It's right now, it's not very far from the fountain. Red front, art on Main, and and they have probably, I'd say 30 some artists represented. But you have about 30 here, don't you? Or whatever the number is. It's wonderful. I can't say enough kind words about what you've done in this community. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just really been a gift. And I think those of you that are regulars, you know what I'm saying. It's been a real gift to those of us that live here. And you've brought blessings beyond measure. And I think yoga, Karen teaches yoga all summer, and I'm not very good to get out there every time, but she has yoga down at the farm. And it's such a beautiful, beautiful gift. And I tell you, if you can get in the habit of having some kind of hobby, and I see Nora has some, she's painted some, and you know, I call my work folk art, but I have painted this way for many years, probably 40 years. But I knew that I liked that quirky look that Grandma Moses had. She was my overall inspiration. She lived in northern the Adirondacks area.
I have a big book of
so
hers.
I have painted.
I have a big book of hers.
You do?
Mm-hmm. Of her
I
paintings.
have done some of her paintings in a rendition, and I wrote a rendition on the back of them. My husband said, I don't think you should. I said, well, I've added all these other things, and clearly on the back, I've signed my name on the front, and it also says it's a rendition on the back, and I was going to bring one of those to this, and I forgot to. The red checkered house is the one I always wanted. Well, I knew that there'd be no way I'd ever have an original of hers, and so I got this in my head that I would just paint some. And so I've done 3. The only thing, the one I was painting on that one. That checkered house is a pistol to paint though, because you have to get all these checks and you have to match the checks, and it's like, whoa, that one's, you know, but I've done 3, and that's probably about as many as I want to do. I kept one, but I've got you know, others. I price them kind of high because I don't really like to sell them too well. And that's what an artist does. If they have like stuff you like to keep, you just sort of like keep it. So anyway, this one I call Grandpa's Farm. And so that looks sort of like his farm.
So yours tell a story. Your pictures tell a story.
They all tell a story.
That's what I love about your painting.
And, you know, I've kind of got a lot of chickens. The old chickens used to get on the hay and they'd scratch around. My grandmother at one time had 700 white leghorn chickens. 700. That was her job, was that. And, you know, to think that 700 chickens. Our farm was raided during the Civil War. So talk about interest in history. I've always enjoyed history. Morgan's Raiders came there July the 11th of 1863, and they took money. And we've got it where the fireplace is. There's like a little, it's like a little square about like this. And it, when you go up in the attic and look down, it is not in the chimney. It's separate from the chimney. And Mr. Harmon baked the bricks. You mentioned Medora bricks. We bought all those bricks, about 10,000 bricks for our gardens from Medora, and hauled those over there. And Carol put all this down, I can't imagine, because I wanted it done in the old colonial way, which was sand and bricks. But the roots of the trees are sort of causing a problem in heaving the bricks, so we have to dig down and take that root, piece of that root out, and redirect it. But this has our old house and chickens, and I particularly like guineas, and so I thought I'd bring this one. I've had guineas before. I don't think I could have guineas at this part of my life, and only because they're so loud.
Excuse me for life.
With all the people that we have,
Let me
these guineas would be quite a racket, I think, because they really make a lot of noise if anybody's around. They are quite a protector. We had some guineas, and this was a pair, and they mate for life, I've been told. And so the female got hit one day on the road, and the male guinea was out there right by the barn. And I went out there, and all this noise was going on, and he was standing over her body and just crying and crying and crying. And finally, I thought I didn't really want to pick up the chicken and take it away, but the guinea, because I didn't want to touch it. But finally, I had to because he wouldn't leave, and I felt so sorry for her. But he was crying because of the loss of her. This one is one I kind of keep, and I tell you, I've painted so many paintings with this one, so I kind of keep this one. He hangs over my sink a lot. I probably should get him framed.
Have your favorites.
But I like to put black and white people in my pictures, and I like them to show kindness to one another. I think in our world, we are so divided, and I don't want that to be ever. We need to love our brothers, and that's really enough to say, but I think, my heart is tender. And besides, I have two Guatemalan grandsons. They're precious to us. And so I just wish that people could find the level of happiness and kindness that, if nothing more, the stuff that you do with your hands really, really matters. And the stuff you do with your body really, really matters too. If you do stretches and things, you don't fall. And so I bet Betty is so active. She has a run every night with your dog. And
I don't run, honey. I drive.
No, not run, but you call it your run.
I drive the Explorer with the window down,
yes,
so I can
yes.
talk to my dog.
She's so active. She did the barn market. How many years ago? That's been a few. And you were 90-something when you did that.
Yes,
That's been,
yes.
probably 4 years maybe ago.
Yeah.
And Gerald said, you should have seen her. He said, she had things in the back of her, in the truck. And he said, I told her I'd help her. And she's like, oh, no, I don't need help. And he said, she literally hopped up in the back of that truck. I did her. She'd been 90, probably 96 when she did that. Amazing. But you have to keep at doing. You just have to do
Stay busy.
and do, and you can't ever give up. But that's just, and I like to put a flag in my paintings a lot, and of course chickens, because we've had so many chickens. I better watch my time here.
I got to tell you about the guineas real
Okay,
fast.
sure.
Somebody gave Bob, I think it was about a dozen guineas when we had the farm and cattle, and the farm was full of stuff. Anyway, he took them up to the big barn. We had the cornfield there then. It had been planted. You could see the rows down through there. He turned those guineas loose at the barn. It went down those rows of corn. We never saw them again. They just took off.
They did. Sometimes you have to put animals up a little while until they decide that they're going to stay at home.
I don't know.
And this one I brought, and like I said, I think I have 10 or 12 or something in there, 10-ish or so on that wall of my paintings. And I've been really hot on Santa Clauses and painting those. So I do some
Anything
smaller
Christmas.
ones of Santa things. This one is in the Art on Main, which is another lovely place in Madison. And that's on Mulberry Street, whereas the Art the Art on Main is on Main Street, where the Mulberry Street is the Art Alliance. Art Alliance, Kim Nyberg is involved in that, and she's such a lovely, lovely gal. And so she put out that she had a call to artists not very long ago, and that you had to pick up your canvas from them. She sold it really reasonable, like 2 for $5, barely cover her cost. And it can't be framed, and it has to reflect something from Madison or the river. Preferably, it's a river town. So this is what I've chosen to do. I may put some more houses in here. I'm not sure. Just yesterday, I put the wild turkeys because I kept thinking, well, what would I put on the Kentucky side? And I've done something similar on the other side of the river. And I've had guineas there, and I've had chickens kind of marching. But so yesterday I thought, well, that part of Kentucky, I think it'd probably have wild turkeys. And so I stuck a turkey, and of course I've got a little riverboat in there. Now, what is the definition? And you could answer this too. What is the definition of folk art versus fine art? Karen, now you don't know if you want me to answer that, or you're going to answer it. Folk art is art that you haven't had training in art.
Untrained artists.
And untrained.
Mhm.
I always say it straight from the heart, but you don't pay attention to perspectives.
No.
You don't pay attention. You just paint it to suit yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like Betty, I don't really know what direction it's going to take me. I did know that I was going to do this scene before because I have painted this before. I have one, at least a bigger one, down at the gallery. Our daughter Elizabeth has a River Oak Chop House in Madison, and so she was really lucky that she got the rights to put a great big mural of Madison on her walls. And originally, I think it was in the 20s. The lithograph was done in 18. John, I don't know exactly what a lithograph is, but is it something? It's a print. Okay. What's big? So Yale University was involved in that somehow. And, there's Lou. I can see you back there. And so Yale University was involved in that. And then they gave the rights to Historic Madison. And so there's one at Historic Madison. There's one someplace else in town. I don't know if it's the Chamber or one of the. And then they let her have the rights to that one. And she's at 605 Main, because her building is about 1850. Well, the first time, I didn't know she was getting it. And the first time I walked in there, it goes clear across the wall. I walked in there and I'm like, whoa, I've stood there before, because you have to sort of put your place. If you're going to paint this, you have to put yourself in this is how I do it. You have to put yourself in the picture wherever the view that you want, And I think this needs a few little more town things in it, and I may do that still, because I don't have to have it into the 6th of December. And I did a green one similar to this one that is more of a summer one. And I always try to have a Lanier home, and then the cotton mill is the one I put in usually. And I don't know, I tried to put the pool in. It didn't look so much like a pool, I don't think, but but you can't always have it. And but folk art, I encourage any of you that do art, just sit down and decide to paint. Just get you a canvas, and I like to have the ones that have gesso, and I put one coat on before I start of whatever my background color is going to be. Mm-hmm. I try to put one coat on. And then I take a lead pencil and I sketch just a few places. So if I'm going to have a big tree here, I want the big things, I'd like to have it where I want them to be before I get all involved in other things. So, this one, I sketched that part in. I sketched the Lanier home, and I sketched the boat in. And, then I do a lot of this kind of wonky looking signs, and I think that's fine. It suits me. I guess it's okay. And so this Kentucky, and then this of Madison. I thought about putting Ohio River, and my husband thought that was too many signs.
It's your style.
It clearly is. So that's kind of how and then I paint it with acrylic paint. I used to paint with oil, and I love the luster of oil. I like oil paintings better, but I paint every day, almost a little bit. And I moved my station upstairs because it was such a mess down there. It was probably a mess when you were there. And so I moved it upstairs, and leaning over oil all the time and turpentines and things, I just don't want to breathe that, so I kind of moved my station, and then, my earlier ones were done in oil, and I actually like them better. The white is so slow. I don't know how anybody handles the slowness of that drying. I used to put a little something called Japan Dry, and it would make it faster to dry, but the white, it turned kind of a yellow color. And so Karen probably has some hints if you do want to paint with oil. But I think oil is, I think they're beautiful. But that's just not. And the other thing I want to, before I close, I want to talk just a minute about Dalton Bolser, which Betty and I would have known well. Some of you barely remember Mr. Bolser, and I think his name really needs to remain. He lived very close here, just over there, right? And he had a little studio, which is still there. And I always tell this funny little story. I think it's funny. I asked him if he would come and paint a big picture of our house. And he had painted a picture of the covered bridge for Mother, Daddy, Nancy, and I'd given that for them. And the covered bridge then was gray, just wood. It wasn't red as it is now. And Karen didn't know that probably. She grew up not far from there. It was great. And so I had him paint that and the picture of the house. Well, he kind of brought me down an early start on it, and he was showing me the color of the red. And the red was kind of pink instead of red. And I'm like, no, I kind of really wanted it like a brick red, kind of darker. So he did that. Well, when he got ready to paint it, he came down to the farm, sat in the field just across from the house, right there. And he brought a small painting, and it's probably more like this one, I think. And he sketched that in oil paint on that size canvas. Now, he's done others before that way because I had an art show of his at one time at the farm, and there were several of it came as the small one and the large one. So I'm like, I really would like to have the little one too. And so I waited a few weeks, so I thought he'd probably be done by then. I don't know about the rest of you that paint, but I use such a tiny brush, it takes weeks for me to paint something that's very big. It just takes weeks because I use this tiny little brush. And so I went up there and I said, I'd really like to buy the little one. I was hoping that when you get the big one done, that I could buy the little one too. And he said, somebody came by and they wanted to buy it. And so he said, I sold it. I didn't know who they were, so I don't know.
You probably sold it for $8 or $10 because his early paintings he sold dirt cheap.
Well, my big one was $150. I remember what I paid for my big one.
Well,
and he framed that one.
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
But I'm like, I'm junking around. You do that too. I'm like, I junk around enough. I'm going to find that someday. Well, yours went by decade, 2 or 3, or he would have painted that probably in the early 60s.
Yeah.
And I never did find it. So I have to tell this on Judy. I have to tell it. You guys have heard me tell this story, I'm sure. Judy Malone is such a dear, sweet friend. She came out and brought friends yesterday. And she said, and we all love Jeannie Greathouse. And she had an antique store, as most of you might have known, and she closed that. But she said, I think Jeannie Greathouse has that picture of your house you're looking for. She said, but don't you tell her, because I'm not supposed to tell it. She doesn't want you to know because she knows you'll be after her to want to buy it, and she doesn't want to sell it. I can understand that, can't you? You know what she did? Bless her heart. When she moved out of her house and moved upstairs above the store, she brought me that picture.
Oh.
And I'm like,
That's
I
Jeannie.
can't just take that off. Whatever you pay for it. And so
That's Jeannie.
$60. So.
Yeah.
And so now I have the little one, but the problem and the story goes on with that picture. I really didn't like the picture not to have the color of the shutters that are on the house, the green shutters. And at the time he painted it, in fairness to him, they were white. And so this was a wintry day, and I just decided to get that big picture down. I did it. And I painted dark green shutters. Well, he didn't have any bushes right over under the front
So you
windows.
gave us some bushes.
So I gave it some bushes. I thought no one is going to know this because he had passed away by then. And nobody is going to know that but me. So I've been very smug about that. People like the picture. I said, well, that's Mr. Bolser did that. Well, I didn't tell him that I adulterated his picture. So when the picture of Jeannie's came, white shutters, no bushes. And so the secret is out. So I just tell it. I just give up. But I love the picture. And that's hung there through various fires in the fireplace and wood stoves, and I don't protect it. And it looks Looks fine to me.
It's beautiful.
Okay, does anybody have any other questions about anything?
We do have some bolsters upstairs.
Yeah,
You want
there's
to
bolsters
see some
upstairs.
I love his paintings. Most of them have a soft, I call it mauve color. It's not, his paintings aren't bright. They're not
There
bright.
is a color, if you ever can find it, and I only found it a few times, called Midnight,
Okay.
of acrylic paint, and it's sort of a black purple. It looks black in the bar, but it has a purple. You put that with white, and it really becomes very soft,
But
purplish.
if you study his paintings,
He
you could,
must have taken purple and a lot of white to get that, because a lot of his has that purplish hue,
Yeah,
which is probably
I
a
call
mauve
it
color.
mauve. I don't
Yes,
know. It's just a soft color.
You can see that in them.
Yes, you can walk in a room, paintings every place, but you can walk right to one of his paintings if you've studied his paintings.
Well, he was a master. Gerald, my husband, took lessons from him, and I've always wished he'd paint because, Teresa Torline took lessons from him too, and she paints very much in his style. I do, if you notice Teresa's paintings, they have that look of Dalton's. I'm sure Dave, yes. But does Dave do big ones sometimes too? Dave Shaw? Does he? Great. Great. But we've been blessed in this county to have the various artists, and the focus now with Perceptions having this art show. I mean, and you have art shows throughout the year too. This isn't the only thing that you do for sure. So, anybody have any questions they'd like to ask?
I know that you do other things besides paint.
I've crafted always. I started out doing, I have been so fascinated with the Appalachian crafts. Mm-hmm. That was where it really all started. And that really drew me much more into that antique look. And, when I moved in, my great-grandparents lived there too. The old house was built in 1836. And of course, when I moved in, I put carpet everywhere and I painted the woodwork white and I hung really elaborate drapes. Not my style. And I don't care if anybody still likes primitives or not. I do. And that's my style. My daughter doesn't really like that style so much. She doesn't like folk art painting. She won't put my paintings in a restaurant. It really doesn't hurt my feelings because I don't really like the way she paints either. She's got a degree in art education. So we're kind of equal, but I love this look with old. And I love old. Anything that's, I guess
it's kind of a remembrance of our grandparents.
Yes. Children relate to folk art too. Mm-hmm. They are like, I can paint like
that.
They
can understand it.
I have to tell you, I have a new Sunday school class. I've got the kids at Grimm Church. I didn't intend to have that, but I've taken them, and now I'm like, I could be there all the time, But we hadn't had a Sunday school at Grimm for 25 years probably, and so we got the room all fixed up, and it's and I enjoy the kids. It's like I'm going to Tea Creek tomorrow because Dan Barron's is going to be at Tea Creek if anybody wants to hear it. And I'm like, I had to call somebody to take care of the class for me, so I wouldn't be here. I include in our lesson, we draw. If whatever the lesson, I have my senior, they're the youth leaders, like 4-H sort of, And so that one does the story and one does a little craft project for the children, and we sing off my telephone, so it really sounds good. And we're going to do an activity too. And so it's just, you look for blessing wherever you can find them, and they're out there. If you just work on trying to find a blessing for the day, you're going to be blessed, and your life is going to be so much happier. So
and create happiness.
Yeah, you do. You certainly do. And I do want to mention though, this gentleman came to my house and I showed him my baskets. That's the only time I've ever focused on baskets with anybody, was John. And he's just like, so-and-so did that basket. And that family did that basket. And I'm like, tell us what you did, how you know about some baskets. You took some kind of a semester or something in Kentucky?
I studied at Western Kentucky. I got my master's degree in folk studies there. But I did field work in Eastern Kentucky with which I interviewed banjo players and old-time fiddlers, but also basket makers and different craftspeople. And I got to meet a few several basket makers while I was there. And then some other basket makers from other parts of Kentucky I met when I used to work with Kentucky Folk Life Program.
Oh, Kentucky has been so
Oh,
good in providing for their artisans. They really go ahead.
Mandy just reminded me, said that hopefully my book about Indiana baskets will be out next year.
Oh, do you have a copy of that John Rice's basket?
Yes,
He has a
yes,
basketry
yes.
book. You could be a John.
I don't know about that.
You know, Bonnie Ox that goes to Graham. John was her cousin. She knows it. She knew him. He was her cousin.
Do an author talk and book signing.
Yeah. Oh yeah, a string club. We could do that, and I'll bring out my baskets. We'll have a big display of them. Yeah. You know, in the early years, I taught basket classes, but it wasn't those. I don't know if you ever took one of those, but they were great classes. And Terry, yeah. You go to the creek, you cut willows, and then and willows make a dark brown basket. And then you gather honeysuckle. That's your twine kind of stuff that you use. If you want to make a honeysuckle basket, you put it in boiling water and you boil it for hours until that outer brown bark comes off. And it stinks to high heaven, I will tell you, while it's being cooked. But you do get a white vine. And then you weave them. And I have several examples of different kinds of those things. I feel fortunate in my life that I've met so many basket makers. But I thought I was going to be one of them. Well, I got stuck on corn husk, and I didn't. But you know, we would take these vines and then grapevine, and make the grapevine handles and round, and then we would put dirt in a bag, and then we'd plant something in that. And they look as cute as they could be. I keep saying to Greg and Lauren, they should start that, because you could still do those, just something that comes from nature that way, but they don't seem to take my ideas too much, which is okay. Karen, you might have to teach a basket like that. You gather yourself, and we can do that. But they look.
I remember about 40 years ago, you wanted me to teach you how to do perspective.
And I never learned. Grandma Moses never did perspective.
It just wasn't your thing.
No.
And you would get it one time, and then you wouldn't, and I just said, Betty, just paint the way you paint.
Yeah, you did. You did.
Paint the way you paint.
That's it. I have never taken classes of any kind because
But you paint too.
because I would lose my own version.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's
And
sad.
if you had them highly, it would not be folk art anymore. I had a guy a couple of years ago. I probably told John this. There was this fellow that came from Chicago, and he brought his mother for Mother's Day, and he came in at my little gallery there, and he was looking at my art. And I said, well, there is a difference between folk art and fine art, because a folk artist is someone who doesn't have training, and a fine artist is someone that is training. He said, oh, like myself. And I said, he said, well, I'm a designer. And he said, and I do commissions. And I thought, well, boy, you're really going to like my folk art. He did. He turned right around and he says, oh, that one. So you do get somebody that gets converted to that, or they can see it. There used to be an old woman in Kentucky over around LaGrange, and she did folk art, and she did that Kentucky Crafted show, and I think her name was Effie or something like that. And I always loved her work because her cows were just so crooked, and so they're just. But once I got on Facebook groups, that's where I took more pride in what I paint. If you're on Facebook at all, go to the groups, and they have so many folk art groups, and you may not like some of them. Some of them I don't like. And then outsider is another term for folk art, outsider art. Somebody in England, I think I read, in the 1920s didn't like the name folk art, so they call it outsider art. And it's a little bit more grotesque than what I think most folk art is. But I have a book. My niece got me a book on that, and it's a real early one. So it's like all devils. And there is a guy called Mike Owsley at Hippo, Kentucky. So if you go online, Mike Owsley, and he has a Master of Fine Arts, and he does folk art, and he's on there every day, and he's in Eastern Kentucky in a hall in Eastern Kentucky, a holler, and he he'll put like cold tipples and things like that in his pictures, and it's very. He keeps it very much Eastern Kentucky. You'd probably like his work. Yeah, I'll try and share that to you sometime. But he's on about every day. Well, any other questions? I've talked too long.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.